Jai Hind everyone. 15th June 2020, the Galwan clash. Now, these Galwan clash, or what happened on the night of 15th June 2020, was not merely a border skirmish. It marked a defining moment in the history of India-China relations. Fundamentally, it had altered the balance of powers, the military strategy, and the political thinking along the LOC. The day when 20 of our bravest of the brave made the supreme sacrifice and safeguarded the sovereignty of our motherland. Today, 6 years later, as we reflect in 2026, it is evident that Galwan was far more than a military confrontation. It was a watershed event that compelled India to reassess its entire approach towards China, border security, and the strategic preparedness on the Indo-China border. Now, in order to understand the significance of Galwan, it is important to recall the situation that had existed before 2020. During those times, China, for decades, had pursued a policy of salami slicing, a strategy wherein Chinese periodically advanced into areas which were under the Indian territory, and then they always tempered the facts. They tried to make temporary changes on the ground and later on exerted pressure, and even when they would withdraw partially, their main aim was to gradually alter the status quo without triggering a major conflict. Until then, India had always followed a policy of peace with this neighbor. But on 15th of June 2020, India completely changed its stand. The event on 15th of June 2020 had ended the era of relative peace that had been maintained since the 1962 war and the 1975 post China Nepal border claims. And it was then we had realized that we were part of the deadliest clash on the Indo-Chinese border post the 1962 war. Now, this war had eventually changed the entire situation. The war, wherein we had witnessed how the policy, the political thinking along the LAC had changed. Okay. Since then, a major uh, diplomacy shift and a strategy shift has taken place. The event of 2020 had changed the equation dramatically, and in Eastern Ladakh, China significantly increased troop concentrations and attempted to alter the status quo across multiple sectors. It was then that China had eyed the regions like the Pangong Tso, the Depsang, Gogra, Hot Springs, and the region of Galwan. Beijing likely assumed that India would react with the situation of historical restraint. But on that day, India had also made up its mind to give a stern reaction to this Chinese unwanted aggression. So let us deep dive into what had happened on the 15th June 2020, how India reacted, and what has been the situation since 2020. Since 2020, this region now sees 50,000 plus troops. Okay, and the entire situation has now changed. We can see that this was essentially the region. Okay, now the regions in Galwan, around the hot springs, the Depsang region, okay, and the region around the Pangong Tso. It was then that Chinese were now eyeing to change the situation at this place. But India was not ready, the Indians were not ready, the Indian soldiers were not ready. Now, on that day, what actually happened? Now, on June 15, 2020, a violent hand-to-hand clash in Galwan Valley, Eastern Ladakh took place. Now, the important points to note herein that no firearm was used, and as per bilateral agreement, nothing was no set of weapons had been used against each other. But the result had we lost 20 soldiers, okay, including Colonel Santosh Babu, who had led their soldiers against this unwanted Chinese aggression. China officially declared that they lost 4 soldiers, but independent estimates and the US intelligence suggested around 35 to 45 casualties had taken place on the Chinese side also. Now, that was also evident from how China had changed its strength. Okay, how Chinese strategies had changed and how China was also pushed onto a defensive back foot. Now, this single event had ended the era that India had been maintaining since 1962. India was of the opinion that they had to maintain our historical restraint against the Chinese because the Chinese then had an upper hand. But this time the forces were not ready to accept this. Now, PLA's sudden large-scale transgressions since May 2020 to unilaterally change the status quo at multiple points was the triggering point. Okay, and the result everyone had seen. The Indians were ready to push back Chinese in the hand-to-hand combat. Okay, now when we talk about the immediate and current military reality, now, India responded within days. They mobilized troops and the armor. The troop number, both sides had rushed in 50,000 plus troops each into Eastern Ladakh. India occupied the dominating heights on the Kailash range, okay, by August 2020 and had forced PLA to partially disengage from some areas. As of June 2026, heavy troops presence, it is estimated around 40,000, 50,000 per side soldiers continues despite partial disengagement. Year-round deployments at extreme high altitudes are now taking place. So, we have seen that an area that had seen seasonal deployments, limited patrollings, now that area has changed into a permanent forward military post. Now, in this situation, we can also see that it was during this time the confrontation in Galwan Valley had shattered one perception. Indian soldiers had then demonstrated extraordinary courage and resolve. And they had sent a very clear message that India would not passively accept unilateral attempts to alter the border. Now, the clash of 15 June 1920 resulted in the sacrifice of 20 brave Indian soldiers, and leading them from the front was Colonel Santosh Babu, who was the then CO, the commanding officer of 16 Bihar. A brave battalion whose fierce counter-response wrote a new chapter in the Indian military history. Now, adhering to the long-standing border protocols to prevent escalation, the troops engaged in savage hand-to-hand combat, and the Indian soldiers had used clubs, barbed wire, and physical force rather than firearms. China had also suffered significant casualties, no matter they do not accept it. Although Beijing was initially reluctant to disclose the full extent of its losses, now beyond the tragic loss of life, the outcome of Galwan was profoundly psychological. The effect of Galwan was psychological and strategic, and it proved that the coercion along the border would carry an unacceptable cost. Now, the situation at Galwan had also transformed India's strategic mindset. Now, prior to 2020, border crisis was managed mainly through diplomacy and limited and very much localized responses. But after Galwan, India adopted an assertive strategy of mirror deployment. Mirror deployment means that India now decided to react with the same force in the same manner as Chinese were doing against us. After Galwan, if China deployed troops, armor, artillery, or air defense systems, India responded. India made sure that they responded with equivalent or superior force. Effectively, they ended the era of passive defense positioning. Now, when we have a look upon how Galwan changed the LAC forever, okay, how Galwan has changed the situation at the line of actual control forever, let us go through this. Now, there was a shift in doctrine from peace and tranquility. Now, this peace and tranquility must be read alongside the historic peaceful restraint. Now, we changed our situation to heavily militarized frontier. New geography of the conflict, creation of buffer zones and no patrol zones at friction points like Galwan, Gogra, Hot Springs, and part of Pangong Tso. Patrolling restricted. Many traditional Indian patrolling points are now inaccessible or severely limited. Chinese infrastructure push. Massive buildup in Tibet. New roads, bridges, airfields, model villages, and civil military fusion have now been seen. Indian have responded with the full force, with the same mirror diplomacy. They have accelerated border infrastructure roads. Example, the Daulat Beg Oldie alternative routes. Now, this is very important. And now India has transformed it into a fully military accessible infrastructure. All-weather tunnels have now been created. They have upgraded airstrips, NOMA, and forward habitations. Moreover, with the Zojila tunnel now coming into operational use in the times to come, we are bound to see a great infrastructural development taking place, and now the mobilization will be more smooth in that region. Okay, so we have understood one thing, that LAC is now governed by buffer zones rather than traditional patrolling protocols. Okay, so earlier there had been some traditional protocols that had to be maintained. Now the question comes, is the LAC a permanent war zone? Now, pre-2020 we would see the troop density, that region had limited or seasonal deployment, but now 40,000, 50,000 per side soldiers are deployed year around. Traditional patrolling points were accessible. Now they have been created into buffer zones, restricted access and no patrol areas. Infrastructure moderate on both sides have taken place, but post the event, massive Chinese as well as Indian buildup has been seen. Tension level prior to that, it was manageable with confidence building measures. Now these confidence building measures must be read in the light as they were being exploited by the China. Okay, now the situation, even though is stable but sensitive, there are recurring minor frictions taking place, but India has now been responding with the same force as the Chinese are aspiring for. Next, the risk of escalation previously was low, but now the risk of escalation is high. Okay, moreover, we have seen that due to the nuclear factor, there are very less chances of escalations, but now India is not at all ready to bow down before the Chinese. Okay, so when we understand this thing, the bottom line in this situation is that post 24, 25, partial disengagements have been achieved. Okay, we have seen disengagement agreements that have been resulting to disengagements around the Depsong and the Demchok region. But the biggest loss that both the sides had incurred was the deep trust deficit that had taken place. The deep trust deficit now persists, and situation can be said stable, but it is still sensitive. So in this situation, we must understand one thing, that how Chinese had betrayed the Indians is now or has now become a year-long problem for the Chinese. Okay, moving ahead, if we see the strategic and the broader impact. Now for India, we have accelerated Atmanirbhar Bharat in defense. Indigenous weapons have taken place, surveillance and logistics. So in order to counter China, we have understood that nothing except self-reliance will be useful for us in a longer run. Okay. Next, we have shifted from reactive defense to proactive posture. We are focusing on theater commands and integrated border management. We have also strengthened our international partnerships with the Quad countries. The US intelligence sharing joint exercises with France, Australia, as well as the US have now been improved, and we are also taking due advantage of our relations with Japan. Next, Chinese strategy. Now, the strategy of salami slicing. Okay. Now, what does this salami slicing means? Okay. Now, this salami slicing is essentially a policy that China has been using since long. Okay. Earlier, this policy of salami slicing, China has been using this trick in the Yellow Sea to capture every new territory. Now, what does salami slicing means? This is basically a geopolitical tactics. It involves a very gradual and incremental encroachment of area that belongs to some other country, okay, or possibly a disputed territory or a maritime zone without provoking a full-scale conflict. This term was basically coined by the Stalinist dictator Matthias Rakosi. So this term was coined during 1940s, but this basically reflects the underlying ambitions of China. Now, China is using this strategy alongside the Indian borders also. China has been using the civilian structures, the non-military areas or the non-military means to slowly assert control over the regions without triggering a military response. Okay. A similar strategy was also used in the South China Sea. Okay, if you could remember the Spratly Islands or the Scarborough Shoal. Okay, in the region Yellow Sea bordering countries, China, North Korea, and South Korea, this practice has been seen quite frequently. Okay, so China has been using this modus operandi. Okay, and they have been taking small steps, okay, to encroach upon the territory of India as well as the other adjoining neighbors of China. Now, infrastructure dominance. So they have been building roads, rail, dual use airports, and fortified positions. Civil military fusion has been taking place. Model villages and paramilitary settlements near LAC have been done. Now, if we talk about the bilateral relations, so trade paradox of over $150 billion annual trade continues. India imports heavily from China. Political and military trust severely damaged. Diplomatic talks remain stalled at higher levels. So basically, we have seen that the biggest effect of this is the trust deficit now. Okay. Now, what was once considered extraordinary in the Eastern Ladakh has now become the new normal. Thousands of troops, heavy armor, long-range artillery, and advanced air defense assets have become permanent features of the region. Now, these have been demonstrating India's ability to operate heavy military equipments at extreme altitudes. Moreover, since 2020, okay, the master stroke has been the proactive posture. Okay, a master stroke of proactive deterrence has occurred since late August 2020. The Indian forces had then occupied key heights in the Kailash range, and it was a brilliant tactical move that had altered the dynamic and placed the real pressure on Chinese positions for the first time during the entire crisis, or we can say first time post 1962. It demonstrated India's willingness and India's capability to undertake proactive military operations whenever required. It had strengthened India's position during the subsequent round of negotiations and had signaled a new level of strategic confidence. Okay. Now, as we had seen that Galwan had also accelerated India's border infrastructure development at an unprecedented pace. Roads, bridges, tunnels, airstrips, logistics network have now been expanded and modernized across the Ladakh. Areas that once took days to reinforce can now be accessed rapidly. We are serving a long-term investment in the national security and regional connectivity along the region. Okay. Next, if we would see the way forward for India. Now, deterrence. Okay. So, we are maintaining sustained credible deterrence with long term year-long troop deployment at all high altitude posts, and India occupying some key positions as well. Then infrastructure, fast track border roads, all weather tunnels, Zojila tunnel, Shinkulla, and village development along LOC. The CAPF integration has been very, very important. Okay, the position has been strengthened with the collaboration in between the army and the CAPFs. Okay, so army, ITBP, and other CAPF forces have synergized for integrated border management and trained CAPF for higher altitude combat support. Okay, now this is something that has taken place, and now India has also been working upon this. Okay, in order to ensure a better deterrence, the army as well as the CAPFs along the Indo-China border now must be made to work in a more coordinated manner. Okay. Next, diplomacy. India must keep boundary issue delinked from overall bilateral ties. They must engage multilaterally, okay, while building the counter leverages. In the long term, we must build comprehensive national power, economic, military, technological, and societal to manage China effectively. So basically, the way forward is that we must take up all those steps that make us economically powerful, okay, so that in whatever the situations India may be in the times to come, we are not affected by the Indo-Chinese relations. Okay. Now, along with this, the key takeaways. Okay, so what we have learned in last 6 years. Okay. Now, Galwan was a watershed moment. It shattered the old assumptions about the LAC management. Okay, and the countering border management's informal trusts have taken place. LAC has been permanently altered into a heavily militarized zone with buffer zones, no patrol areas, and permanent deployments. India has responded with resolve from reactive defense to proactive modernization. India has now been responding to every Chinese aggression. And even though this region is not a permanent war zone, but okay, we can see this is now the new normal. Okay, new normal of armed coexistence requiring eternal vigilance. Okay, so one thing also we can see that beyond military deployments, India has now formally recalibrated its situation, its broader Chinese policy. And a central principle that we are noticing has emerged, okay, with normal bilateral relations. We have understood that the normal bilateral relations cannot exist with instability and tensions along the border. India has now been consistently maintaining that meaningful progress in the economic, trade, and the political relations would require peaceful relations at the border, the peaceful relations, the stability at the frontier. Furthermore, Galwan has accelerated India's geopolitical realignment on a global stage. Now, we have cemented our commitment to the Quad countries. Okay, so India, US, Japan, Australia. Now, this relation is very strong in comparison to what these countries had with India earlier. And we have triggered a parallel sharpening of India's maritime strategy in the Indian Ocean. We have created a multi-theater counter pressure against the Chinese expansionism since then. So today in 2026, the region of Eastern Ladakh stands as one of the most heavily militarized high altitude region in the entire world. Numerous rounds of negotiations have taken place and disengagement has occurred in several friction points like the Pangong Tso and the Gogra hot springs. Yet, the broader boundary dispute remains unresolved. Both the nations have adopted a long-term military presence along the LAC, as the new strategic normal. Now, although China continues to possess immense resources along the region, okay, Galwan has produced a crucial psychological shift. China has learned that India would no longer tolerate any attempt to alter the status quo. Now, this triad of military readiness, political determination, and the national resolve has significantly influenced the Chinese strategic calculations. Earlier, the China had taken India for granted, but now, post the Galwan clash, there has been some defining chapters in the evolution of modern Indian military doctrine. Okay. Now, these events had been proving that while the desire for peace is essential, peace can only be preserved through strength. And 6 years later, remembering Galwan is about recognizing a profound strategic transformation. The bloodshed in the heights of Ladakh had reshaped India's approach to national security and have redefined the strategic balance along the world's most contested frontiers. So, I should not hesitate in saying this, that when future historians will examine the trajectory of Indo-China relations, then 15 June 2020 will be remembered as the day when India demonstrated that the defense of sovereignty was non-negotiable. And when the strategic landscape of the Himalayas had entered into a new enduring chapter and had declared it as the new normal. So, if we talk about the current situation, okay, finally, to answer the most important questions, okay, so the most important questions that we have raised in the starting, okay, the most important questions that we have learned, the most important lessons that we have learned in the started, is LAC now a permanent war zone? The answer is no. It is not a war zone with active combat, but it is a permanently militarized high tension zone with a credible risk of localized clashes. Has Galwan changed the LOC forever? Yes. The pre-2020 era of low trust but functional peace has now ended. Okay. The new LAC is defined by the buffer zone, heavy troop presence, and a long-term strategic rivalry in between these nations. So this is how I would like to summarize this entire event. Okay. And please do let me know your views on this. Okay. Moreover, today we must take a minute and we must be thankful to those martyrs who gave the supreme sacrifice to save the motherland, who gave the supreme sacrifice to rebuild India's situation globally. Those people, led by Colonel Santosh Babu, had given their lives, okay, and had taken the lives of enemy without any fear, and had done everything to reshape the ultimate stature of the country on the global front. So it was for the respect of the motherland, they did not hesitate before giving the supreme sacrifice. Okay. So this was essentially all from my side today. We'll see you all in the next session. Moreover, if you are preparing for the civil services examination 2027, 28, 29, then the limited period offer, the Arambha offer, giving you 50% off ends today. Please do not waste any moment further for enrolling in the StudyIQ IAS courses, wherein we have been offering you complete English and English batches. So today is the last day to avail the limited period offer. Do not waste any moment further and subscribe in the smartest way to prepare for the civil services exam. So see you all in the next session. Jai Hind.